Hello, this is Dr. Joel Nadler, and I want to welcome you to the Applying to Graduate School audio lectures. These are meant to be fairly quick, fairly simple, and kind of just an overview of the graduate school process. But really, the focus of this is to give you enough information that hopefully you have a better understanding of the process, a better understanding of how to do well at the process, and also kind of what materials are needed and when, and what kind of organization is necessary. The process of applying to graduate school should be a fairly complex process that basically plays out over a semester. And that's because the process of selecting schools, finding out what they need, creating the actual materials necessary to apply, gathering the necessary information, and ensuring that you have gotten good letters of recommendation all require a fair amount of organization and a fair amount of work. Now, that doesn't mean that it's overwhelming. That doesn't mean it's something that can't be managed, but it is something that should be approached kind of systematically and with an attitude of keeping calm and staying motivated. So each one of these lectures is going to try to focus on one particular area. So this is primarily the introduction and just some broad ideas of what it's like to apply to grad school and some questions to ask yourself about, is grad school actually right for me? So this first session is basically going to be a series of videos covering kind of the introduction to the idea of undergraduate boot camp for getting into grad school. And really the idea behind this was to give students a better idea of what they need to do and basically just tools and resources to help the process. We're going to be talking about getting ready to start the process, an overview, and then towards the end of this particular session of lectures, we'll talk about the actual application process and how to get good letters of recommendation. So what is graduate school like? That's the first thing to recognize, is that graduate school is somewhat different from undergraduate. Both of them are higher education. Both of them involve classes. However, the nature of the classes and the nature of the work does shift fairly substantially as you move from an undergraduate psychology program to a graduate psychology program. Now, I should make a little note here that this program is designed around the idea of applying to psychology graduate programs. Many graduate programs may be similar. However, it really depends on what program you're applying to. So if you're applying to a non-psychology program, a program outside of the field of psychology, recognize that some of this material may not necessarily be completely accurate. So the first thing you really want to ask is, are you truly motivated to move forward to a graduate program? And that involves two areas. The first one is an interest in the discipline. In other words, do you truly find psychology itself to be interesting, but also the graduate program that you're going to be focusing on to be the area of your greatest interest? And the reason for this is that graduate classes are more rigorous, they're more complex, they require more work, and honestly are harder to succeed in. And that's hard to do if it's an area that you're not that interested in. So you want to make sure that you have a strong interest, a strong internal motivation, if you will, to do well in those classes. But also, you shouldn't be doing it just because you want to learn more. There should also be an end goal beyond the education. What are your career goals? What are you actually trying to get to? What job or career do you want to eventually end up in? And how is that graduate program going to help you in that? And sometimes students are not necessarily sure of what their actual program should be, but they have a good idea of what they want to do with their lives. And my suggestion in that case is actually find people in that career. Reach out, do some Google searches, ask around friends and family, find someone that's actually doing the work that you want to do, and then ask them what kind of education or master's programs that they had to do in order to get that job. You want to talk to graduate students in those programs, graduate students through the process, and again, get an idea of what they see the program is, how they see the differences between undergraduate versus graduate education. Recognize that the classes are somewhat more competitive, and what I mean by that is that most undergraduates, especially those considering graduate school, are usually students that have done very well in their classes. They're typically A or B students. However, when you move on to the graduate program, everyone's an A student. And that tends to occasionally have something, basically a little bit of an effect on the psychology of the students. We often call it, you were a big fish in a small pond, and now you're a small fish in a big pond. And what that kind of refers to is that your performance is no longer an exception, it's the expectation. There's a lot of reading involved in grad school, and not just reading, but comprehension reasoning. You'll be reading research articles, often multiple articles per class per week. You'll be assigned a large amount of reading out of various textbooks. So again, if you find reading difficult, if you don't enjoy reading, recognize that's a major part of graduate school, as well as writing. You will be writing in every class, and again, far more writing than you're probably used to. You'll be writing papers, and in most graduate programs, some form of large empirical, multiple draft thesis or dissertation, or both. And again, so ask yourself, not necessarily do I have wonderful writing skills, but am I open to feedback on my writing, and am I enjoying learning how to write better? Recognize also that most of the fields in psychology that require a master's or a PhD, in other words, graduate education, are generally interactions with the public, with people, with organizations, with clients, with students. Presentation and teaching is a major part of graduate school. So again, you should either be comfortable public speaking or are strongly motivated to build up that skill set. And again, in psychology, there's going to be a strong research component in almost any graduate program. Lit reviews, conducting research, understanding research, and again, you should be welcoming those experiences and something that you actually are interested in. And finally, there's on-the-job experiences. Most graduate programs in psychology are what we call a science practitioner model. So not only is the program teaching the science of psychology in your specific subfield, it's also teaching you the practice of it, the process of learning how to actually apply that psychology to real world situations, and most programs are going to include that as well. So again, if you're highly motivated, if you know your career requires a graduate education in psychology, and you like to read, you like to do research, you like to write, you like to speak and work in groups, then graduate school is probably going to be a pretty good fit for you. So just a few important pointers to think about in your communication as an undergraduate as you prepare to apply to graduate programs. First one, before you call or email a professor or graduate secretary, make sure you check the program's website. So what this broadly means is you are highly encouraged to build up a relationship, either in person or through emails, with programs that you're applying to, or even professors that you're asking for letters of recommendation. But make sure that you're not asking questions or sending emails that are easily answered by easily found information on program websites. In other words, make sure that you're not wasting their time with information that is clearly available. They'll know it's available, and it's not going to build that relationship that you're wanting. You want to email professors and graduate secretaries for information about the program that is not widely accessible. You want to treat everyone with whom you interact with respect and assume that anyone you talk to with or email with has a stake in your admission decisions. This includes other students in the program. This includes administrative assistants. Basically, you want to be at your best behavior in all interactions with the program that you're hoping to apply for. If you're applying to doctoral and master programs, remember that master's programs are also competitive. So a lot of people think of master's programs as a shoo-in. I can tell you that the average psychology master's program has a rejection rate somewhere between 50 and 60%. So more than half of the people that apply to master's programs in psychology do not get in. So if you're applying only to master's programs, that doesn't mean you get to slack. Now, doctoral programs have a higher rejection rate. They are harder to get into, but both of them are competitive. Also, make sure you're not applying to more than one type of program at the same university. In other words, you may legitimately be not sure what graduate program you're interested in. For instance, when I was applying to graduate programs, I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to go into industrial organizational psychology or cognitive psychology. Both of them interested me, and I finally decided mainly to focus on industrial organizational psychology because I wanted my work to be more applied, while cognitive psychology tends to be more scientist/academic. However, I still applied to a few cognitive programs. Some of the places I applied to had both an IO program and a cognitive program. If I applied to both of those, both programs would have known that, and that would have communicated to those programs, I'm not sure what I want to do. Now, the reality is I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but that's not something I want to communicate. So just recognize that especially within universities, they will talk to each other, and often the applications go through the same central person who will see that you're applying to more than one program. So that's just a little inside hint to let you know that's not really an acceptable call to do because, again, of what it communicates. And make sure all the calls and emails that you are doing through this process are from you yourself. Don't let friends or family members, especially parents, do this. And again, sometimes parents get really involved in the process. They may be helping to pay for your graduate education. However, any program that gets a call not from you, but from someone asking questions for you, again, what it communicates is that you aren't in charge of this process, and it doesn't really speak well for you. So again, just some pointers to think about as you're looking at programs and as you're reaching out to those programs to learn more about them. So what are the traits of a good graduate student? This is a question that's often asked me when I'm interviewing undergraduates applying to our graduate program here at SIUE, and I'm involved in the Industrial Organizational Psychology program. I would say an interest in psychology, so really communicating that psychology isn't just an interest, it's a passion. And not just that you have a passion for psychology, that you're wanting to make a career in psychology. You want to be mature and self-motivated. You want to communicate that you are capable of time management, you're capable of making tough choices to make sure that you get to your goals, and that you're going to be in charge of your own motivation, making sure you make it through the program. You want to make it clear that you're highly organized and hardworking. That again, a lot of the times, especially in graduate programs, there's not a lot of hand holding. And what I mean by that is a lot of time assignments aren't going to have pages and pages of definitions of how to do the assignment. You're going to be expected to figure it out. You're going to be expected to have to organize and create the project based on the information that you're gaining from the class. You also need to be somewhat flexible and have a lot of time management. And if you're going to be working one-on-one with patients in a clinical setting, you probably also need to be somewhat empathetic, but also have an understanding of boundaries. All of these are things that you should have if you're thinking of going on into graduate programs in psychology, but there are also things that you want to make sure you're communicating in your application, both through your personal statements and any interviews that you may do. So some just additional resources to think about, and these are a little bit dated. There may be newer versions, but American Psychological Association, the APA, has a book called Getting In, a Step-by-Step Planning for Gaining Admission to Graduate School in Psychology. This is a pretty good book to look at, especially if you're interested in PhD programs and clinical or counseling programs. It's good for anyone applying to psychology, but it's somewhat written from the viewpoint of getting into those fairly competitive PhD programs in clinical and counseling. The APA also creates almost yearly, I'm not sure what's the last year they put this out, the Graduate Studies in Psychology book. And what this is simply a listing of all of the actual APA accredited graduate programs, both master's and PhD in psychology currently being available. This is a great resource when you're trying to figure out what programs to apply to. You can look the programs up, you can find out how many students they let in, what the average GRE is, what the average GPA is. You can see how many of their students are funded. You can see kind of the demographics of their students and also some of the achievements of the programs. So this is also a great resource to have, and I would suggest probably picking up the most recent copy if you're seriously interested in picking out graduate programs. There's also a lot of articles available, and many of them are linked in the Blackboard shell for this actual boot camp. But they're basically from Psychi magazine, and they're specifically designed to help undergraduates find their way into psychology. If the links on this page aren't working, you can also find them by going directly to the Psychi's webpage, or you can actually go to the webpage listed here, which is one of my web pages, which also lists links to all of these various articles on getting into graduate school.